Welcome to Lifetree Community Church. I'm glad that you are here. If you don't know, I'm Pastor Dan, and honored to have you here with us. When you came in today, you should have received a program, and in that program is a connection card. I invite you to take that out right now, and if everybody take out your connection cards, you can fill that out. If you're a guest with us, everybody fills that out. We'll collect those in a little while. You can put prayer requests on there, anything you need. We'd love to follow up with you, so just want to invite you to do that right now. As you're doing that, just want to point out that it is June. Has everybody noticed it's June now? It's crazy, right? We're in that month. It's June. It signals the approach of the New Jersey summer. How many of you are excited for summer? Summer's like your thing. You're like, yes, summer. How many of you are like, no summer. You want the cold? Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry. It's coming anyway. So summer is almost here. As a kid, I know the teachers. Any teachers in the room? We got any teachers in the room? You know that right now kids are going crazy. And teachers are like, just get me out of this place. I'm married to one of them. That's how I know. And they're like, I just want it to be over. I just want school to be out for summer. I want it to go away. As a kid, there's nothing better than summer vacation, right? You're running out of school because it's over. And I know now that my parents weren't as excited about the summertime as I was. Right? I was very excited about summers, but my parents not so much. It's easy for the days to be spent doing a whole lot of nothing, right? In the summertime as a kid, you can just sort of sit there and just waste the days. Well, my parents came up with a scheme to make sure that didn't happen in my life. And it's actually had a very significant impact on my life even to this day. And it went like this. I was really into baseball cards as a kid. I love baseball. I love sports. I followed all sorts of, the Yankees were my team right now. Let's give it up for the Yankees. Come on, Rich. Oh, man, Judge is on fire. All right. So anyway, I loved baseball cards. I would study them. I know everybody's batting averages. I'd pay, trade cards, do all this kind of stuff. So the deal went like this. For every 5 books that I would read, my parents would buy me a pack of baseball cards. Sounds like a lot, right? Back then, economy, whatever, that's what it was. And so let's just say I was motivated because I was really into baseball cards. I read a lot of books in the summers. Like, we're talking a lot of books. Like, I may have read like 100 books in the summer. Like, I would read anything, Encyclopedia Browns, anything by Judy Blume, right? Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, anything, those mysteries, I loved those. I mean, I was reading anything and everything. At library was my best friend because that meant more baseball cards. We were actually going through it. My daughter was like, Dad, can't you sell some of these? I still have them. Still have the cards. I've got an emotional attachment to them. I don't know what it was. I just didn't want to give it. But I still read voraciously to this day. Probably, but the problem is nobody's giving me baseball cards anymore. Like, isn't that a problem? Like, I just read now, and it's like, that's all I get. I put the book back. It's like, well, another one. That's it. One of my favorite books as a kid was actually a true story. It captured the life of a guy by the name of Glenn Cunningham. Anybody know who Glenn Cunningham is? Anybody? One? Okay, one. That's it. All right, there you go. He was a young boy from Kansas who was burned terribly in a school fire and went on in his life to have an absolutely incredible story. He became a track star, ended up going to the Olympics, was really, really incredible, and then later in life operated a home for troubled boys. It's a tremendous story, and the title of the book was Never Quit. There's the title of the book, Never Quit. It's one of my favorite books. If you haven't read it, it's a simple little biography, sort of easy. I mean, like even preteens could read it, but adults, it would be great for you too. It's a great Never Quit, Glenn Cunningham. Just powerful story. And that mantra, that idea, never quit, has kind of like stuck in my head and in my heart throughout most of my life. No matter what's going on, never quit. Never quit. Never quit. There's such value in perseverance. 2 of our kids presently are on their school's track team, and they run, and so I get to go to meets and I watch these kids run. And let me tell you, the sprinters are impressive. Some of these kids are fast. Boy, are they fast! I mean, you're like, man, if I was in that race, I'd have pulled both hamstrings like 4 steps in. These kids are flying. But that's not what impresses me the most, right? What's most impressive to me as I sit there and I watch is the long-distance runners. It's the stamina displayed by distance runners. And it's not lap number 1, and it's not lap number 2. It's like, 4 or 5 for the people doing real distance stuff. Because I tried track. My dad was a track star. I was like, my dad, I have to run. My dad was a runner. I went out for the track team, and I hate it. I hate running. And I remember the feeling, I'm like, I got to run the mile. My dad ran distance, I got to run the mile. And I just remember, somewhere around lap 3, the coach is like, come on, push, catch the guy in front of you. And I was like, I don't care enough to run any faster. There's not enough motivation here. Every muscle in my body feels like it's on fire. I don't want to go any faster. I just want it to be over. I don't know if anybody feels that, but running, they're like, running's great, you get that runner's high. I don't know if it exists. I think it's a myth. I don't think it's in me. I don't get it. But as I watch those athletes running and pushing and getting faster and kicking it's impressive. It's impressive. There's something to never quitting, to that drive to keep going, to endurance. It's inspiring. And it's not just a track thing, right? We all have days when life gets hard. And the temptation is to quit, to walk away, right? It happens all the time in life. People quit all the time, right? We quit on marriages, on pursuits, on dreams, on goals. There are people that quit on themselves. It's so easy to quit when life gets hard. And here's why it's so tragic. Here's why it's tragic. Because often the things that are the most valuable in life, the things that are most worth our energy and our effort and our sacrifice, those things are hard. The things that are really valuable, they're hard. And something that's hard that becomes the reason people quit. But actually the reason that it's hard is actually an indicator that that's valuable and probably needs to be pursued even more. And we allow the evidence of that to become the thing that discourages us. And that's actually most true when it comes to faith. More than anything else, it's true when it comes to faith. As many people approach faith and are drawn to it by the joy and love and hope and goodness that faith promises. And those are all true and they're real and they're definitely, absolutely 100% part of it. But inevitably, somewhere along the way, as you're on the journey of faith, there's a hiccup, a curveball. You like what you hear for a while, but one day you hear something and it hits you different and you go, oh, that's hard to handle. That's hard to believe. That's hard. I don't know that challenges my faith. That feels difficult. And in that moment, we don't know what we're going to do with that. Today, is that a good setup? Are you ready? Oh, I can't wait to hear what we're going to talk about today. Today we're starting a brand new series exploring one of the most famous stories in human history, the story of Noah and his ark, right? His big boat and the great flood that covered the earth. It's a story of love and kindness and wisdom. And it's also a story about the judgment and the wrath of God. Oh, there it is. That sounds fun. That sounds like something we should talk about. We should talk about the wrath of God and his judgment. It's sort of the underbelly of faith, right? The vengeance and justice of God is not a side of God that we're eager to jump into. We're often uncomfortable with the judgment of God, with the wrath of God. We hear that and we go, oh, I don't think I like that. That sounds different. And it can be hard to understand how a good God who's gracious and loving uses his power to punish people. See, some aspects of his nature leave us with more questions than answers. And when some people hear this, when we get into this story, some people get into those parts of the story that are hard, that are difficult, and they're tempted to quit on God, to say, I want nothing to do with a God like that. I'm okay with a God who's loving. I'm okay with a God who's kind and is gracious and forgiving and all that, but a God who is judgmental or just, a God who is full of vengeance and wrath, that doesn't sound like a God I want anything to do with. See, if we eliminate or ignore any part of God's nature, here's the danger. That becomes an incomplete God. All the qualities of God are important because they help us understand who he is and what he does in totality. You can't just say, I want this part of God, but not those part of God. He is all one. And if we're coming to God, we need to understand all of him. In his book, What's Wrong with the World, G.K. Chesterton said this: the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting or lacking. He says it has been found difficult and left untried. See, people come up to the hard part and they go, I'm just not worth doing the work to figure out how that looks. I get to the hard parts of faith and I just go, you know what? It's just too hard. It's not worth the effort. I'm just going to kind of walk away, dismiss that part of faith, or I just never deal with it. I sort of leave it out there in the other part of the world. I just never really fully look that in the face. Far too many people, and people who are on the journey of faith, when confronted with the reality that God judges and punishes sin, they reject it all and walk away because that's a hard truth. In Narnia, one of the great stories, Aslan, if you know the story. If you don't know the story, again, you've had years to read it. You've had years to see the movies. It's not on me. Okay, Aslan is one of the main characters. He's a lion, right? He represents sort of a God figure in the story. And there's this famous, everybody knows it. They say, well, it's a lion. These children want to meet him. Well, is he safe? Of course he isn't safe. He's a lion. And Mr. Beaver says, but he's good, all this kind of stuff. Here's the thing. We want God to be safe. And he's not. And that's a problem for a lot of people. But we can't misrepresent the gospel just because we want people to accept it. See, God has revealed truth about himself. And we need to look it square in the face and seek to reconcile it all. This is what it means to work out our faith with fear and trembling. To say, okay, I'm going to wrestle with this. I'm going to work this. I'm going to jump into the hard parts. Because here's what happens if we don't. If we don't, not only do we neglect and have an incomplete God, but then we're in danger of creating and crafting a God who is very much in our own image, who fits in our box, rather than the God who exists beyond time and space, whose thoughts are light years higher than your thoughts, whose ways are infinitely beyond your ways. We can't reject God simply because we don't understand him. There's too much at stake here. We have to wade into the difficult parts and search for the truth. And so, for the next few weeks, we're going to dive into some hard truths about God and find where and how his goodness interacts with that. How do we synthesize the goodness, the loving part of God, and the judgment of God? How does that fit together? So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to look this in the face and say, okay, let's not ignore it, let's not dismiss it, let's say we don't really want to talk about it. We're going to go in there. We're going to look at one of the most familiar stories. Like I said, it adorns the walls of most of our nursery walls. Isn't it ironic? I find it really ironic. It seems like a kid's story. Oh, we're going to Noah's Ark. We'll put this on our kid's wall. Yeah, God flooded the earth, destroyed humanity. Let's put that on our kid's wall, right? But that's just what we think. You think Noah's Ark. Oh, kid's story, right? That's what we decorate the kids' rooms, right? Here we go. We like animals. They like animals. So here we go. It's anything but a kid's story. We're going to find that out. Genesis chapter 6 is where we're going to pick up the story. I invite you to read along in those Bibles. Genesis is at the very beginning, so you can just be a few pages in, or you can read on the screens behind me. And here's the story. It says this: the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. Pause. Do you read that? That's an opening line. Everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. Oh boy. Kids story. Yes, kids. Let's tell you this story. Verse 6. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry on the ground. I appreciate the distinction between the big and the small, right? Even the birds in the sky. I'm sorry I ever made them. This was only 10 generations removed from Adam. It took 10 generations for humanity to absolutely and utterly screw up the world, right? So much so that it says, we're going to find here in a minute that everything was utterly and completely evil except one. You think life is bad now? You think the world is bad now? Think about what it was like then. Utterly and completely. Everything. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's hyperbole, but that's there. But here's the thing. All hope was not lost. We get to verse 8. But Noah found favor with the Lord. Verse 9. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time. And he walked in close fellowship with God. In a world that is utterly corrupt, Noah did what was right. All the time. Think about this. A world that is absolutely unclean, except for one. One guy in the middle of this soup doing what's right. Noah's goodness was radically different than everybody around him. How did he do that? What made Noah different? All we know is that we're told that he walked in close fellowship with God, that he had a relationship with God, a personal relationship with God, a close personal, and it changed everything. That's all we know. That Noah had a close personal relationship with God, and because of that close relationship with God, he was different than literally everybody on the planet. Do you have that kind of relationship with God? No judgment, I'm asking. Do you have the kind of relationship that enables you to live different than everyone around you? That you don't have to be anything. It didn't say Noah was great, smarter. It didn't say he was wealthier. It doesn't say anything else. All it said is the only qualifier we know is that Noah walked with God and it set him apart. You can do that. No matter how bad the world gets, you can be like Noah. All you have to do is walk in close relationship with God. Verse 10, it says, Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Great boys' names if anybody's looking. I really voting for Ham. Ham! All right, come on. Now, verse 11, God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. Again, we hear this again. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on the earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. Here's the side of God that we're trying to avoid. He's now communicating this to Noah. He's filling him in. We don't want to talk about this, about a God who would destroy every living thing because of how corrupt it would become. It's perfect, again, for nursery walls, but God puts it up there. And the truth is this. This is what God is revealing, that he has to address sin. That's the takeaway here. God is telling Noah, listen, it's too far gone. That God's judgment is actually right and good, and you want it. I'm telling you today, you want God to be a God of judgment. And you're going, I don't know if I want God to be a God of judgment, Pastor Dan. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't really think I want that. Actually, no, I don't. And I'm telling you, yes, you do want God to be gracious and merciful. You want all that. But you feel perhaps today, as you hear that, you go, but if I were in God's shoes, I would find a way not to destroy the world. I would be more gracious than God. I would be more loving than God. I would be more patient than God. And that's what you're saying. Some of you are saying that. Some of you are in your head. If you're thinking that, that's what you're going. I just say, just consider that. Some of you are more upset about the animals being destroyed than the people. And that in itself is telling. You're like, but the small scurrying animals, right? Why did God have to kill the animals, right? Here's the thing about judgment. God is good, which means judgment is good. If there's no consequence for wrong, evil wins every time. Do you want God to be a God of justice? Because without it means evil wins every time. There's no holding anything accountable. And people who do absolutely horrible and horrid things in this life will never have to answer for any of it. Do you want to live in a world where that's a reality? See, the existence of judgment gives us hope that one day everything that is wrong with the world will be made right. That we know that we're going to come to a point somewhere along the line where everything that has been wrong will be made right and you don't have to do it. The burden of making wrongs right are not on you. God says, I got this. I am a God of judgment, of justice. I will ensure that all wrongs will be answered for. They will be accounted for. Listen, I don't understand this fully, I'll be honest with you. As I read this story, there's a lot of hard things in here. And I don't understand why God had to do it the way he did it. I don't understand why the flood. I don't understand why God had to go into all this. But let me tell you, in his wisdom, I got to believe God knew somehow this was the only outcome. There was no redemption for the people, that they were somehow so totally evil that no rescue plan would have worked. There was no possibility for redemption, or else God would have allowed it. But at that time in the world development, and where the people were, there was no other way. And so God tells Noah of his intentions, confides in Noah because Noah is different. And here's the thing, Noah wasn't special. Anybody on the earth at that time could have known God the way Noah knew God. Noah didn't have, it doesn't say that God revealed himself to Noah and nobody else. Everybody had the same access to God that Noah had, but somehow Noah was just different. He chose to believe God, to walk with God. So it's just, God is gracious and all. Again, it's hard. I don't understand it all, but we can acknowledge and say, I don't get all that. You can say that. At the end of the day, the flood was God's method for judgment. He decided he would set in motion something. It was interesting. Why a flood? Well, if you go back to the beginning, I don't know if this is actually what God was thinking. I'll ask him someday. But when you look at the beginning of time, at the beginning of the story, it says, in the beginning, God created, right? It says, and he separated the waters from the earth, from the land, from the ground, the terra. It says that God separated waters from the land. And basically what God is doing here is he is undoing creation. He is rejoining the waters and the land. He's restoring. It's like a factory reset. He pressed and held the home and the side button for 3 seconds, right? And it shut down and it comes back. That's what he did. The water returned. And he intends eventually to then re-separate them again and send the people back out again. And he tells Noah what to do. Verse 14, he says this, okay, so Noah, I'm going to do this. That's what's going to happen. It's interesting, in this whole dialogue, Noah never talks. We never hear Noah say anything. He's a bit player in this. The story is about God. It's not about Noah. Noah doesn't say a single thing. But God says to Noah, build a large boat from cypress wood. Some say gopher wood, in different translations. We don't really know what gopher wood is. It's just what you go for. But he said, cypress wood, waterproof it with tar. They would have called it pitch, but it's basically like a tar-like substance that they would have covered things to make them not leak inside and out. And then construct the decks and stalls throughout its interior. He said, make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Do you know how big that is? 45 feet high. I don't know what the ceilings in here are. Anybody think like 40 feet maybe? Somewhere 30, 40? I don't know. 30-ish? Okay. So higher than this, 75 feet wide. I don't know, so wider than this room, maybe a little wider than this room, and going for more than a football field and higher. An enormous boat. And he says, oh, by the way, leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat, put the door on the side, and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle, and upper. Noah was not a boat builder. Just so you know, he didn't have a shop. He didn't have cranes. He didn't have systems for any of this stuff. God says, look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die. Yeah, God, we get it. You're kind of hammering home the point here. Verse 18, he says, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife, and your sons and their wives. So Noah, his wife, 3 boys, their wives, right? 8 people. 8 people in the boat, right? And he says, now here's where it gets fun. He says, bring a pair, this is where the nursery comes in. Okay, bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. I know how much food I need weekly for my 3 animals, right? That's a lot of food. All the animals need food, okay? And Eventually we'll find, but it was for over like a year. There's a lot of food. That's just a lot of, I think that's like the third deck was just food. Like just food. It says, verse 22, so Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. So to summarize, the people in the world had gotten so bad, so far from God, that they are completely and utterly evil, except for one. We're calling this series, It's Not About the Boat. So often we hear about Noah's Ark. The story is really about so many other things. It's not about the boat. It wasn't really about Noah. It's about the consequences of sin. It's about the power of doing right. And it's about the love of God. See, Noah's story reveals who God is to us. God is totally opposed to evil. Totally opposed to violence. He can't allow it or accept it. It can't persist without consequence. All evil, all violence has to be met with an answer. Judgment for sin is inescapable. We need to acknowledge that. Sin is not a small thing. Sin, and we can define sin as anything that violates the truth, anything that violates the reality of God. That sin separates us from God, and it's not just pushing us a little bit. It's not like I sinned, so I'm a little farther from God now. It cuts you off completely from God. That's what sin does. It cuts you off from the source of your life, of your joy, of your hope, of your peace. But the story tells us that God has to deal with sin. It's unacceptable in His sight. We have to understand, sin is not just something small. It's huge. But that's not the whole point of the story. The point is that God can't be around sin, but God does not abandon humanity. What He says to Noah is so important. He says, but I will confirm my covenant with you. His covenant. What's a covenant? What is God talking about here? A covenant is the first time we hear this word in the Scriptures, but a covenant is an official agreement between two or more people. A promise is one way. I can make you a promise. That's just on me. A covenant is two people coming together and agreeing together. God says, I will make a covenant with you, which means I'm going to make an agreement with you, but you've got to make an agreement back with me. It's going to take two to tango, right? It's like a marriage. It's why they both say vows, right? They're both making a covenant agreement to each other. It's not just one saying, hey, I'll be all right with you and you can do whatever you want. No, they're both agreeing together. God makes this covenant with Noah. He says, here's the covenant. I will be your God. You're going to be my people. It's the same covenant God makes throughout time, right? It's the same covenant God gives to Abraham. It's the same covenant God upholds for Isaac and then for Jacob. It's the same covenant with David and Solomon. It's the same covenant that the countless prophets and priests throughout the Old Testament are begging the people to remember. He says, don't forget the covenant God made with us because you're walking away from this. God says, hey, I'll be your God. You people, you're walking away. Don't forget the covenant. It's the same covenant that Jesus came to show us in a brand new way. It's the same covenant that He offers you and me today. Here's the covenant. God says, hey, still today, just as much as it was back in Noah's time, here's the covenant. I will be your God if you will be my people. Same covenant. The story of Noah and God's judgment on the world is a reminder this: God will never break His covenant. He will always keep His end of the bargain. No matter how bad the world around you gets, even if everybody else, literally the entire world, has abandoned God, He will not give up on you. Noah, let me tell you, the entire world is utterly and totally lost, but you are keeping your end of the covenant, and I will keep my covenant with you. We can say it like this: God will never quit on you. He says, I will never quit on you. No matter how bad the headlines get, no matter how out of control the world seems, God always perceives even just one faithful life. He sees you. He sees what you're doing. You may see, nobody else knows, nobody else recognizes it. It looks like, yeah. God says, I see you. I can look at the world, I can discern all this stuff, but I will see even one. Plenty of people quit on God, but He will never quit on you. So what? What are we supposed to do with that today? So what? Let's look at Noah. When the world was utterly evil, what did he do? He built a boat, like a big boat, and it sounds ridiculous. Like, how is that a response to an evil world? I'm just going to go build a boat, right? So we should all be boat builders. That's the takeaway here. Here's what stands out to me. Despite everything going on around him, Noah never quit on God. Noah saw a world around him that was absolutely losing their minds, and he could have very easily been like, what difference does it make? Literally everybody's doing it. They have all abandoned God. I will too. I can't be the oddball here trusting in God. But he believed in God's judgment and in God's love, and so he said, okay, I'll build a boat. If God, you tell me to do something, I'll do it. Noah had never built a boat before, not that we have any evidence, definitely not one so big. But he said, if you say so, I'll pick up a hammer and some nails and I'll get to work. There are times when what is happening in the world around us seems so bad that we can ask God, have you ever asked this? God, how could you let it get like this? Why did you make the world if you knew there'd be so much pain and suffering, God? Where are you, God? Where'd you go? Do you see this, God? Do you have a plan for fixing any of this? It can feel at times like God is not doing his part, like he's not upholding his end of the bargain. You look around, you go, God, what are you doing in the world here? The reality is it's not that God is not doing his part, it's that we have forgotten our part. And what you see around you is a world that has no idea that there is a God offering them a covenant. And so they're not upholding their end of the bargain. But let me tell you, just because people around you are not doing their part, don't you ever quit on God. Be different. Don't quit walking with God. Don't quit doing what he asks, no matter how beyond you it seems. Noah's obedience was an act of faith. Building a boat, listen, I don't know how much time and energy and resources it took to build that boat. And I don't know if Noah did it alone. He probably somehow had means. Somehow that worked out. He probably had help. He probably could have, people could have paid people to help him. I don't know how it all worked out. But at the end of the day, he's building an enormous boat. There's no water. There's no water that can hold a boat like that. There's no lake or river anywhere that you're going to drop that into. Like, what are you doing, man? That seems ridiculous. And Noah, how are you going to get all those animals onto the boat? How are you going to feed them? How are you going to make all this happen? It was beyond ridiculous. God, you can't be serious with all this. But Noah took God at his word and believed he could and would do what he said, even though it had never happened before. And that's why Noah ends up in the Hall of Fame of Faith. Right? Hebrews 11 says, through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. And it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God who had warned him about things that had never happened before. And by his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world and received the righteousness that comes by faith. So here's the question. In a world that has lost its way, what is God asking you to do or to attempt that maybe feels way too big for you? Because that's what faith looks like. It looks like when everybody else is doing something different, you say, I still believe in the judgment of God and I still believe in the love of God. God may not ask you to build a boat, but he may ask you to do something else that you go, it feels too big for me. Maybe God is asking you to start a new story of faith in your family. Maybe you're the only one in your family who believes in God. And God says, you're gonna start a new generation. Maybe God says you're going to be the one to break generational cycles of addiction or abuse. Says you're going to do a new story. You go, God, I don't know if I can do that. And God says you can do this. Maybe it's simply God says, hey, you're going to read through the Bible. You can do this. Yeah, I've never done that before. Yes, you can do it. You can tithe. I've never done it before. You can do it. Maybe God says, hey, I want you to lead a branches group or join the worship team. You go, you can do it. It feels big for you, but you can do it. Maybe God's prompting you to pray by name for every coworker in your office, every single one, or maybe every classmate. You're going, that's too big. No, you know what? You can do it. To do something perhaps no one around you thinks you can do. Maybe something you don't even think you can do. Perhaps God is calling you to be a missionary somewhere no one has ever gone before. I don't know how to get there from here. Yeah, well, it's the whole point. See, God has chosen us, ordinary people like you and me, like Noah, regular folks, and he says, here's the deal. I'm going to make a covenant with you. And if you'll trust me and if you'll walk with me, it's not about the boat. It's not about what you do. It's about who you are and who you walk with. It says, I will use you to reveal to the world a complete picture of me. When you say yes to God, when you build the boat that's in front of you, when you do what God has put in front of you, you're not condemning the world. You're not out there saying you're a bunch of... Noah never said a single thing to the world. All he did was build a boat. He just did what was from him. The world doesn't need you to condemn them with your words. Our job is not to condemn anybody, but our job is to remind people that there is a God who cannot accept sin and will deal with it someday. And so our response is to be obedient and to do what God prompts us to do. The world needs to know what's at stake. They need to know what's on the line. God has offered all humanity a personal covenant with himself. He says, I will be your God if you will be my people. I will bless you and I will make you a blessing. So I want to challenge you today. In a world that can be so messed up, do whatever God puts in your heart to do. That's how we solve this. Even if you think you can't possibly do it, don't quit on God. Don't quit on what he has given you to do. Our world doesn't need us to recreate God in a palatable form and go, yeah, we don't want to talk about the judgment of God. I'm just going to go do the nice things. I'm going to tell you all the good things about God. We're going to hide all the parts of God that are hard. No, that's not what the world needs. They need to see God in all his power. We can't promise anything that's not true. I love this. One of my favorite quotes, Charles Spurgeon, an old preacher. He said, I defend the gospel the same way I defend a lion. I just get out of the way. God is big enough. Let him do his work. Don't try to make him palatable for people. As you walk with God and as he prompts you, build your boat. Whatever that looks like in your life. Whatever God is prompting you to do whatever he asks. Too much is on the line for us to quit and to say, nah, I don't. People need to see all of God. This world isn't any better today than it was back then. God just promised he's not going to drown us all again. We're going to close with communion. Communion's an opportunity for us to remind ourselves what's at stake. Every time we think about what Jesus did on that cross, that he gave his life for us, that eternity was too important, that the judgment on us had to be addressed. That's what communion's about. It's saying, hey, judgment, God's got to deal with sin. He's just going to say, hey, I'm going to do it. So Jesus took on the judgment we deserve. Everyone who accepts God's love, his covenant love, guess what? You get Jesus and his forgiveness of sins. You escape judgment because Jesus took the judgment for you. See, God's a God who has to deal with sin. He says, so I'll do it myself so you don't have to. Communion is how we recognize that if you have a relationship with God, you are welcomed into his covenant. He says, I will be your God and you'll be my people. So if you have a relationship with God, you are welcome to join us today. And if you have never started a relationship with God, I invite you to do that now. We're going to pray in just a moment. You just say, God, I don't know if I've ever actually responded to your covenant offer. I want that. I'm going to offer that to you in a moment. So if you haven't been served today, you should have received one of these little communion cups. If you didn't get one, could you raise your hands? Our ushers will make sure that you are served. And in our tradition, There's some more over here and in the back. Thank you. In our tradition, we believe that the bread represents the body of Jesus, the physical body of Jesus, and the cup represents his blood shed on the cross for us. It's purely symbolic, and we just listen to Jesus' words who told us to do this regularly, to share this regularly, so that we could remember what's at stake. What's at stake in the world. And I want to read a scripture from Matthew 26. It says, as they were eating, Jesus took some bread and he blessed it, and he broke it in pieces and gave it to his disciples, saying, take this and eat, for this is my body. And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. And he gave it to them, said, each of you drink from it, for this is my blood. Listen, he says, which confirms my covenant between God and his people. It says this is confirmation of the covenant. Every time we do receive communion together, guess what we're doing? We're reminding ourselves, I'm in a covenant. He's my God. I'm his person. He's watching out for me. He's seeing me, all the evil that's going on around me. He sees what's going on. He's rewarding this. Listen, judgment is inescapable. Righteousness is undefeatable. The faithfulness of God is eternal. God says, mark my words, I will not drink this again until I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. It's a promise that the covenant is not just for here, for now, but it's for eternity. That God says, I got you forever. You are my child. So let's just take a moment. Would you take that bread? Would you pray with me for a moment? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this bread. It represents your body. And God, if there's anyone here today who has yet to have a relationship with you, in this moment, Lord, the doors are constantly open. Your arms are constantly open, and you just say, come to me. Lord, if we acknowledge in this moment we are sinful, we deserve judgment, but you in your great love came down, paid the price for us. You forgave us of our sin, Lord. Lord, we are your people and you are our God. And you want to be in covenant relationship with us, Lord. We accept that covenant today. If we accept that covenant today, Lord, that's it. There's no hoops we need to jump through. There's nothing we need to prove to anybody else. You see our heart. You respond to our heart. You see truth. So if we truly come to you today and welcome you and say yes to you, then in this moment we are part of your family. And that qualifies us to celebrate communion together. To say we're going to celebrate. This is a good thing. That there is now for no condemnation, no judgment on us because of Jesus Christ. Lord, I thank you for this bread and what it represents, Lord. That you loved us so much that you refused to quit on the mission that God the Father gave. Thank you that you were willing to come this far to love us. We praise you, God. We give you thanks today. Let's eat together. The cup, it represents his blood. That our forgiveness, our freedom from judgment, it came at a price. That God so loved the world that he gave his Son. And by sharing this together, we are committing that we are not going to quit on God. That we're going to do our best to stay in covenant relationship with him. Would you join me in a prayer this morning? Heavenly Father, I thank you for what this cup represents. Lord, it's just a small little thing. But what it represents is so much bigger. God, you are the God who loves us so much that you are willing to pay it all, to give it all, to hold nothing back. Lord, and today we stand here, though we are sinful people, your forgiveness, your blood, Lord, it paid for that, and you consider us blameless. Lord, it's not fair that you do it, but your love is bigger than that. Let us never forget that you are a God of judgment, yes, but you marry it to love, that they are together, Lord, that it goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Your love isn't as meaningful if there's no justice required. What makes your love so great is that you demand justice and that you are willing to step down and take our place to pay what you yourself demanded. You have paid for this with your own blood. We thank you, God, for your great love for us. It's in your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Let's drink together.